Meeting will come to order. This is the meeting of the Long-Term Power Advisory Committee for the City of New Ulm, our regular meeting, and thank you for all of you folks who decided to take the time to come out and listen to the presentation this morning. A special welcome to the American Transmission Company folks for making the trip over here. First item on the agenda would be accept the minutes of our July 16th, 2015 meeting.
I'll move that.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the minutes of the Long-Term Power Advisory Committee meeting of July 16th, 2015. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. From here, I'll just turn it over to Jim McCabe to give us a little bit of introduction about how we got to the point we are today and why we're here. Jim?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I've been talking with ATC's Michelle Gasper over probably last 9 or 10 months about how we might work together, in partnership that, might be of benefit to the city of New Ulm. And she had passed on an offer to speak to the committee as a whole. And the committee agreed to that at the July 16th meeting. Since then, the city attorney with ATC's attorney worked out a couple of agreements. These went to the commission on the 28th of July. The commission recommended them to the city council. The city council approved it at their August 4th meeting. It was a mutual confidentiality agreement and a letter of intent for potential contribution of transmission assets for ATC membership. That was signed on August 6th by the commission president and the city manager. So ATC's here now, and Michelle, if you could introduce your group, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, can do that. Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the committee for having us here today. I am Michelle Gasper. I've been with ATC about 10 years. I currently work in our business development department, but I have also a background in finance. So started in a property accounting, asset accounting role and moved to through finance and into this role. So thank you for being here. And
I'm Ken Todd from ATC. My background is in system operations, system maintenance, construction, and engineering. My current role is in the planning department, and what I do is support the business development side.
I'm Eric Myers. I'm manager of business development for ATC. I've got about 18 years of experience in the utility industry, including fuel purchasing, environmental policy, and public policy. And I've been at ATC for about 2 years in our business development group, helping grow ATC's membership beyond our original Wisconsin and Upper Peninsula, Michigan footprint.
I'm Jim Hodgson with ATC. I've been with ATC since the first year it was in business back in 2001. Come out of background in finance, currently work in business development.
So just wanted to start this presentation with going over what are we here to cover today. We did introductions. Want to give you a little bit more information on who the American Transmission Company is, or ATC, as we refer to ourselves, what it means to be a member owner of ATC and the benefits associated with that, MISO recognition and some of the paths that are ahead of New Ulm in regards to being a recognized transmission owner in MISO, and then lay out for you some next steps. And one of the most important things I think we have in there too, right before the next steps, is a video for you telling you about what our ATC membership currently thinks of being an ATC member owner. And so we'll give you our story, and then we'll close it up with their story, and then we'll move on to next steps. So as far as who ATC is, we're the first multi-state standalone transmission utility in the United States. We were formed in 2001 after the Wisconsin legislature passed an action to have all the Wisconsin utilities divest their transmission assets into a single company. And one of the things that this did was it gave municipalities and cooperatives the ability to invest in transmission at the same rate of returns that investor-owned utility would also earn. And so it kind of leveled the playing field for investors in transmission in the state. We've been in business since 2001. We're a member-owned LLC, so we're not a private or publicly traded company. We're member-owned. Everyone that is part of our company has contributed to the company and the equity that we have in the company to be a member. So you can't go buy our stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. You have to make a contribution in order to be a part of ATC. Why are we trying to grow the business? Since our formation, we've had 14 years of doing business in Wisconsin, building up the reliability in Wisconsin. We had a lot of issues with that. Crossing seams between utilities in Wisconsin, and now we're saying this model works. We've got experience in MISO, and we want to look for members across the country that we can mutually benefit from transactions together and that we could partner with and have them be member owners of our company as well. We own about 9,500 miles of transmission and have about 529 substations. You can see the pie chart there kind of breaks down by voltage what we own. We do have 345 kV as shown there, but it's not as big of a portion as some of our smaller ones. So we've got a lot of experience working with municipalities and cooperatives specifically on assets that, you know, aren't serving 345 kV loads. We've got a lot of 69 kV as well. We've got assets in Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, and Illinois. So we are already operating assets in Minnesota. So, and as we look for opportunities to develop in places outside of our traditional footprint, the next places that are comfortable to go and where we have experience that we can share are in places where we've already got some assets. We have 26 member owners, including investor-owned utilities, municipalities, and cooperatives. We also operate right now 5 pricing zones within the Mid-Continent ISO. They're all in the same pricing, they all pay the same transmission rate, but technically they are 5 different zones. So when ATC was created, all the members decided that there was going to be one rate. So New Ulm would be a little bit different than that, as it would be in a different pricing zone, but we do have a lot of experience in MISO then with pricing zones. So who is ATC? We were formed, as I said, by contribution of assets. And what this meant at the time was that you got 50% in cash and you got 50% equity in ATC. So if you take in round numbers, if you contributed $1 million of assets, a net book value of $1 million of assets, you got $500,000 in cash and $500,000 worth of equity in ATC. We have 5 investor-owned utilities, including, like I said, 1 in Minnesota. And then we've also got 21 municipals and cooperatives. And one of the big drivers for our success since inception was how can we bring all these utilities together and make sure that we're meeting the needs of all these individual utilities. So the best way for us to do this was to administer a customer satisfaction survey. We do have public power representation on our board. That is a role that currently is filled by WPPI Energy, which is Mike Peters, their CEO. So there is representation for public power on our board. So that's one way, but then the satisfaction survey offers us an ability to go out to the members and ask for their feedback, the people that take phone calls day in and day out and that work with our staff. So we're able to monitor that through this survey. Also, we have a dedicated member relations staff. So there's someone that will administer questions that you have, get you to the right place, take questions on the survey to make sure that you're getting the information that you need. So one of the things we thought was really important was to show you what the survey scores look like, because that's going to tell how we're really doing with our business. So you can see here that we have on the right, it shows all ATC members over the last few years as far as what the scores have been. And one of the things that is very important for these scores is that ATC develops goals for the business. And these scores for the business, or the scores that we get from this, go directly to the business and how well the business is doing. So if these scores perform lower, the business as a whole is not doing well. And that's directly reflected in how the employees are rewarded. So the scores that you see here are very, very important to us. And you can see the overall scores, and then on the left, you can see the scores from the municipals and cooperative members independently. And we take a lot of pride in that because those scores are higher than the average, which means that we're spending more time and effort making sure that all the members are treated the same, rather than saying, well, if you're an IOU and you've contributed so much in assets, you're going to get this focus of all our time. We're making sure that these members also have the ability to ask questions, solicit input, and be part of the process.
Would you like questions as we go, or do you want them at the end of the
You
presentation?
can ask as,
Just curious, municipalities, you said you had 20-some. What is the range of population of those municipalities? Do you have a rough idea?
oh boy.
Just a rough idea.
I'm going to have to divert to,
You guys can think about it.
yeah, I mean, it's, so our service territory right now is from southeastern Wisconsin up to the UP. And then there's a couple little offshoots, like into Minnesota and into Illinois. But, you know, you've got bigger populations in the southeast of Wisconsin, and then it dwindles as you go up.
Sure.
So we've got a range in there, so it's
Possible to get a list of those cities?
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's actually in the folders that were given to you. There's a list of the cooperatives that are in there. So flip it over to.
So kind of building off of what Michelle started with here, transmission is all we do, but because we know that our customers are in the generation business and in the load serving business, we take very close account to what the goals of those customers are, or those members. So transmission becomes the platform for achieving those business goals, whether it's a generation owning entity or whether it's a generation and load serving entity. So we wind up with a lot of conversation going back and forth and through that customer relations staff to find out how our various members are positioned and what is it that transmission needs to do to bring benefit to those members. And so that just builds up, you know, we've found that working closely with the public power utilities, and I don't know exactly what range they are. I'm going to guess, I don't know, I'll pick on Jim just for a second. I'm thinking Manitowoc would be at the,
It's like 15,000 meters.
yeah, and that would be one of the larger, I
Yeah.
think, municipalities. And the WPPI Energy members go down to very small entities, so it's in that range would be my best guess. So working closely with them, when we started, we had 1/4 of one person that was tasked with customer relations. We found that that had to grow to a department that now is a manager plus 5 people. So that focus, so that the members have a phone number to call, someone to have that dialogue with. But we don't force that participation. Each member picks their own range of comfort. Some we meet with a couple of times a year, and that's very, very substantially satisfactory. Others we might have, you know, monthly conference calls with, depending on how they choose to do it. We're very experienced in the transmission asset management process. The NERC process that's mentioned there in the parenthetical, that takes care of the bulk electric facilities. Those are 100 kV and above, where we're held accountable for, you know, if we do something that's outside the standards, we're subject to up to $1 million a day in fines from the federal government. We take the best practices. I mean, when you have that sort of incentive that the government puts in front of you, you find ways to find best practices to keep yourselves out of that predicament. We apply those same lessons learned to our 69 kV assets, even though they would be below that threshold of bulk electric system assets. Operations and maintenance, because the transmission system now is owned by a separate entity, we could have lost that natural synergy of transmission and distribution operating well together. We've put that bond back together. The staff that's on the ground that does most of our switching and maintenance, substation maintenance, belongs to our members. So we have entered into agreements to kind of knit back together that natural synergy of transmission and distribution working together, so that those we just refer to them as T&D agreements, kind of knit back together that vertically integrated business synergy. The next bullet's really probably forms sort of a theme that we're very much data-driven. We are a monopoly. We have a tariff that gives us a rate of return. One of the things that stakeholders sometimes criticize us for is, well, you just build things because you get money for it. And so we find we have to be very data-driven, we have to be very transparent, and that builds a whole series of metrics that we've put together that give us a rank from for utilities that construct things well. We do it for the right price, we do it on the right schedule, we do it with an extraordinary emphasis on safety. On the top of the right-hand column, we make sure that we are able to manage or measure the benefit to the customers. They know exactly what the tariff costs. When we put $1 million of rate base in service, we can tell you exactly what the tariff cost of that is over 40 years. The benefit is much more elusive, and we've spent a lot of time putting together that benefit metric and sharing that back with our customers, and that's where that more than $100 million a year in benefit for their participation in energy markets, for more efficient operation relative to losses, and all the other attributes that transmission really brings to the table. We consistently achieve cost estimate accuracy. Again, that's part of the discipline of managing budgets very, very well, managing costs very, very well, and comparing ourselves to make sure that we're running the business well and sharing that information with our members. Top provider in terms of reliability, we've got a large book of exactly what are the reliability statistics for the ATC system. And then the regulatory approvals. When we go to a state, and each state has a different routing and siting and environmental set of rules, we make sure that we have reached out to the affected communities and that they understand what we're trying to achieve, why it's beneficial to the population as a whole, and we've got a 70 for 70 track record when we are going to the state commissions asking for approval of our projects. A little bit about the Midwest ISO, and out of that, under the first major bullet, the sub-bullet there says FERC open access tariff, and that's a inside baseball term. That is the way in which a member, like potentially New Ulm, gets revenue back and is able to create that hedge is by participating in the FERC open access tariff. We're able to administer that. We administer that, as Michelle said, across 5 rate zones today. And so our members benefit from the assets that we're able to build and that we then put to use under that FERC open access tariff. So that's one of the major reasons why MISO is very important to us and to our members as a regional entity. The first bullet and the second sub-bullet, or the last sub-bullet, we make it very, very seamless. We take care of the real-time operations as ATC. We take care of the planning process. And through the member relations staff, we share that at a level that you would be comfortable with. If you want to know a lot about the planning, we can have very, very detailed discussions. If it's something that you're more comfortable with at a highly summarized level, we don't force that on you. And then as the possibilities of how New Ulm could participate in the Midwest ISO, it's a stakeholder-driven process. ATC represents its members in that process, but all of our members are also able to represent themselves. And sometimes they do that individually, and sometimes they aggregate together and take care of that. And looking at the stakeholder meetings and engagements with ATC, the rate recovery process really is a subset of the tariff, and then participating in those detailed reliability, economic, and routing and siting processes. Those are things that ATC takes the lead on. We allow and we encourage our members to give us the insights because they have the local specific knowledge for how their community views new assets, routing and siting, and the electric infrastructure in general.
financial benefits or configuration of the contribution to EPC. This is an example, as we've been talking with Jim. These estimates are based on if the net book value of the transmission facilities.
I wonder, Jim, can you go over there by the mic? We actually are televising this, so
Certainly.
probably can hear you better over there if you.
Come stand around.
While he's taking his time to do that, through the miracle of the interweb, the populations of the communities that they serve that they have listed would be Algoma, the hotbed of salmon fishing world, 3,100 population. Reedsburg, 9,000, Sturgeon Bay, 9,000, Wisconsin, Rapids, 18,000. So it's I think the bulk of their meters are probably in the co-ops and not necessarily the municipals that they have listed here.
Okay, thank you.
Just one other point there, there are a number of municipal utilities that are represented through WPPI Energy as well. And then, I guess the biggest one I found on our list would have been the Ken's at Manitowoc. Given that direct experience.
Thank you.
Okay, as I was saying, is this better?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. This is an example on how the contribution would work and the financial aspects of that. Under this example, this is using the assumption of $700,000 worth of transmission assets that would be contributed. The way the contribution works, those assets would go into the tariff of ATC. So the $700,000 would be added to the rate base of the ATC tariff. Of that, we finance our tariff 50-50 between debt and equity. We take that 50% that's debt and we issue the cash back to you. So you get a cash payout of the 50% or the $350,000. Then the remainder of that $700,000 worth of rate base that is added is equity that you earn on. So you're getting full earning, including the cash back, of all of the assets that you contributed to ATC. With that then on the ATC assets, we earn a 12.2 ROE currently, and that your earnings then would come back in that same neighborhood from the earnings off of the off that investment, the $350,000, and that works out to around $42,000 or so worth of earnings over the course of a year on an investment of $350,000. Obviously, if the transmission asset investment is higher or different than that, then the earnings would be different. This is the structure that we used when we formed ATC. Everybody contributed their assets, as Michelle explained, and then 50% cash was distributed out as we took on debt. In that manner, everybody's earning based upon the asset value of those in total. The earnings, we will have ongoing voluntary capital calls as we continue to make investments into the system. The emphasis there, that's an investment opportunity. If you're choosing to make additional investment, you'd have the opportunity to participate in that. You're not obligated to, so that if you don't have the funds available or would not like to invest additional money at that point, you aren't under any obligation to make any investment. But that would then increase your investment in ATC.
What is the asset base that you have?
The asset base, we have a rate base of over $3 billion right now.
Oh, that's big.
3 billion is what you said with the B.
Correct, 3 with a B. 3 billion with a B,
Yes, sir.
yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So if the city of New Ulm is considering charging a regional transmission tariff or an open access transmission tariff for the use of its transmission assets. One path for doing that would be to join an independent transmission organization or an independent system operator like MISO. And there are different pathways to doing that. Certainly, becoming an ATC member would be one pathway to do that, but that's not the only way. And as Michelle has illustrated in this diagram, you don't have to become a MISO member. You continue to go along as business as usual, and there are benefits and costs to doing that. What we're hoping to illustrate for you today is that there are advantages to joining MISO as part of ATC. And just a few of them. If you're going to join an independent system operator and charge others for the use of New Ulm's transmission assets, you have to seek a tariff from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So then New Ulm would become regulated for the purpose of transmission assets by the FERC. And that's not an insignificant exercise. It's fairly costly. If New Ulm were to join ATC, your assets would become part of ATC's tariff with the FERC, so you'd forego that particular step. There are certain responsibilities that come with having your own FERC tariff and having that tariff administered, and there are certain legal costs associated with that under an ATC membership agreement, those would be shared with your other fellow ATC members, but also would be shared with the other users of New Ulm's facilities as part of the cost of doing business. So just to delve a little bit deeper, if New Ulm were to choose not to join an independent system operator and seek its own FERC tariff, the costs of operating New Ulm's transmission assets and any future capitalizations would be borne by New Ulm's local customers, by the residents of New Ulm. Current rate and capital structure might limit needed investment. So the amount of capital a city has to spend on new projects is a finite number every year. And so if your appetite for investment is greater than your capacity, you may have to slow down how fast you build those projects. The existing interconnection agreements that you have with your neighboring utilities would remain the same, and so there may be opportunities through joining MISO, either independently or through a partner like ATC, to look at those interconnection agreements and provide more options to New Ulm in purchasing power. The full potential investment revenues might not be achieved. Going back to that slide that Jim Hodgson shared with us, ATC's capital structure is 50-50 debt equity. So under a FERC tariff, you're allowed to earn a rate of return on the equity portion of your investment. Your debt is a pass-through. So whatever your cost of debt is, you recover the cost of your debt, but you're provided an ROE on the equity portion. ATC's capital structure is 50-50. So to the extent that New Ulm's capital structure for investing directly was lower than that, the return on capital employed would be lower. The ROE might be the same, but the amount of dollars that would be available for return on equity would be smaller under a different capital structure. So as a result, the full potential of investment might not be there. There are future physical and cybersecurity challenges, both with entities that are trying to get access to the grid or disrupt flow of electricity or disrupt flow of services to consumers. And as you become part of a network separately from ATC or with ATC, there are obligations to maintain security that incur costs. And so those costs can be achieved at a lower rate through economies of scale in a partnership like ATC. And then finally, through the tariffs that you already operate under, you are paying for a portion of the MISO region, but the MISO region is not paying for a portion of New Ulm's assets. So you pay in, but you don't get paid out as a non-MISO member. And so as a MISO member with your assets integrated into MISO, assuming they are deemed to be transmission assets, there's an opportunity to share revenues. Did you have a question, Ken? Oh, I just saw your hand. Oh, sorry about that. Caught you out of the corner of my eye. I want to make sure you might have had something to add. Any questions on that slide? Just the kind of the perspective of if you don't go, these are some of the things you should consider. Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about, well, go it alone. It's not rocket science. Join MISO as an independent transmission owner. Under that scenario, you would continue to assume full responsibility for siting, permitting, and constructing any transmission facilities, directly on your system. Projects that abutted your system, you would have the opportunity to bid competitively with other MISO transmission owners. So if they're not reliability projects, the economic projects like the CapEx 2020 type projects, those are going to be competitively bid by others that are both MISO members and folks from the outside. And that's just the nature of how the ISOs are working these days. They're competitively bidding the projects. The MISO integration costs that you would incur, so if you want to join MISO, they're going to come out and take a look at your system, and they're going to say that there may or may not be deficiencies about the New Ulm system that have to be improved before you can join MISO. And so those costs would be borne directly by New Ulm and not shared with a partner. You'd be responsible for managing your own interconnection process, setting up your own interconnection tariff, and having both generation to transmission and transmission to transmission interconnection agreements as New Ulm. There may be increased costs associated with these MISO requirements, and those would be borne by New Ulm customers. The MISO tariff returns would be, as I mentioned before, calculated on whatever New Ulm's capital structure was. So if you're 80-20 or 60-40 or 30-70, depending on what your equity mix is, you only earn return on equity on the equity portion. Finally, these last two things, there's NERC compliance. Not all of New Ulm's assets would have a NERC nexus, but the National Energy Reliability Council has mandatory reliability rules and penalties, and Ken kind of gave us the perspective on how big those numbers can truly be. And administering those reliability programs are not terribly scalable. You have to have expertise in understanding what those rules are, whether you have 50 miles of transmission or 5,000 miles of transmission. You have to be committed to compliance either way. Finally, the MISO process, it's a stakeholder-driven process. There are lots of committees, subcommittees, subject matter experts that participate in the MISO process, and getting involved is you're swimming in a large stream. And so participating effectively in those stakeholder processes can be a learning curve and can be a resource commitment. Any questions on that slide before I move on? All right. So if there are other partnership models out there for joining MISO, you could seek the advice of a consultant and bring in some of those resources you might not have on staff to help get you through that transition period. Those costs would be borne by New Ulm customers. There may be, in some partnership agreements, we have a owner-member model. Not all partnerships are as collaborative, and there may be a perceived loss of control. As was mentioned before in our business model, our members do the physical work on the assets that they contributed. We contract with our member owners for that work, and so making sure that you can maintain the workforce you need to do your distribution work would need to be considered when forming those new partnerships. If you completely outsource the transmission work, you still need to have guys to do the distribution work, and if those folks were split between T and D, it can create some staffing issues. So we recommend that be something you consider when looking at any other partnerships. Finally, we talked about the learning curve of the MISO process. Pick the right partner, pick somebody who's going to help you get through that piece. And finally, you'll still retain significant financial risk associated with those things you didn't expect, or large projects that you have to go into that might not fit in the city's budget in the next year. And so the breadth of your financial clout will depend on the strength of your partnership and the financial strength of your partner. Obviously, save what we see as the best for last here. This is, what we think are the benefits of joining MISO with ATC as a partner. The MISO integration costs, we believe, are much lower because we've been through the integration process. We know how to navigate those waters. There would be an opportunity for a cash infusion, because as Jim Hodgson mentioned earlier, the membership transaction results in a distribution of cash and equity for the full net book value of your existing assets. Currently, we earn an ROE of 12.2% under our FERC tariff. Full disclosure, that is an ROE that is being contested in a couple different stakeholder processes right now. Part of that is just that, when these ROEs were set 12, 13 years ago, we were in a different interest rate environment. And so as interest rates have stabilized and in some cases come down, the gap between this ROE and the risk-free rate has changed, and so it's being revisited on that basis. But the goals of promoting transmission development as a matter of national energy policy are still solid. The O&M work done by New Ulm Line Crews would continue to be done by New Ulm Line Crews through service agreements with ATC, which we think is we believe that's a core strength for ATC. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel on how you work on your system. The guys who built the lines have been maintaining them for decades, know more about them than we can learn through a transaction. And so we want to keep those folks in place, maintain that valuable workforce. You would have the opportunity to be included in ATC's previously negotiated FERC interconnection process with Northern States Power and our existing interconnection agreement. We do have substantial expertise in dealing with municipal utilities, both on the transmission and on the long-term operations. We understand how important it is for you to know what the capital forecast is. We do a 20-year forecast every year. We publish approximately 20-year forecast. We publish a 10-year forecast every year. And we sit down with the stakeholders and talk about what our 10-year capital strategy is every year. And it's not just a set it and forget it process. That 10-year forecast changes a little bit every year. The outlook for the sources of generation, population growth, all those things change a little bit. And so we're trying to make sure that folks know what capital calls might be coming down the road, that there aren't any surprises. Finally, as Michelle mentioned earlier in the presentation, customer service is something that we value greatly, and we didn't come out of the box knowing how important it was. And I think in our first couple of years, we didn't commit enough resources, and we learned that lesson, and now we have dedicated customer service representatives for our member owners, and we monitor that customer service very carefully, and it affects the bottom line of the employees of ATC. It affects how we get paid. Any questions on that slide? Michelle, this is yours. I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle then, and thank you very much for your time today.
So as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to take a second then to let you know what we believe are the benefits, summarize those for you, and then after this we're going to let our members do some of the talking for us and tell you what they think is great about their experiences with ATC. So, just to recap, we've got an established MISO representation. We actually existed prior to MISO existing, so we were directly involved in the formation of MISO, and so we've got a lot of experience in learning the stakeholder process and being able to have our planning staff have a lot of input into MISO's processes and being able to navigate those. And it can be a full-time job, quite honestly. There's so many stakeholder meetings that you can't possibly cover all of them yourself, and so our members have seen a benefit in being able to cover all these different areas with the larger staff that we have. Lowered operational risk, including unscheduled maintenance and compliance. We've got you're going to have operations here. We also have operations. We have 2 operations centers, fully redundant, back in Wisconsin. You can benefit from those as well from for system issues. So that's another opportunity that you have. Higher return on assets due to the favorable capital structure, and this goes back to what Eric and Jim were talking about, where we've got a 50-50 debt equity structure, which most smaller utilities, municipal and cooperative, tend to be more highly debt levered, and so you're earning on a smaller percentage. So we're able to offer the same types of return that a investor-owned utility would have at the municipal and cooperative level. We maintain efficiency and control of joint T&D maintenance resources through service agreements. Like Eric said, one of the biggest benefits that ATC has is the ability to retain local labor and local knowledge. We can't possibly cover as many states as we're in now and as many states as we want to without keeping this local knowledge around. It's key to keeping the system reliable, and it's key to helping the business continue to share information. One of the issues in Wisconsin for a long time was the fact that the utilities didn't get along well and weren't talking as far as system planning went. And from our perspective, we've been able to bring them together and have an arena where they can all state their needs, and we can come up with the best solutions for the ratepayers rather than just what works good for a given utility. And potential for more favorable interconnection agreements. As Eric said, we've already got established interconnection agreements with many of the utilities that are your neighbors by virtue of projects that we've done in the proximity and area that we're talking about. So ATC holds a lot of those, and New Ulm as a member would benefit from those interconnection agreements as well. And then opportunities to benchmark and share best practices with ATC members. This just goes back to, our ability to knowledge share and keep growing our best practices throughout all of our footprint. So that's what we have to say. I'd like to give you a chance to hear what the members have to say first, and then we'll take questions after that. Hopefully don't blast anyone away.
They are total experts when it comes to transmission.
That single focus really enhances their expertise.
We rely heavily on ATC and their resources.
Their technical knowledge of not only the transmission, but the interconnections with the distribution has provided our engineering department with much more information than we ever expected from them.
We all know that we're getting the same quality of construction, same quality of design, the same expertise throughout the entire ATC system.
They have built over 2,300 miles of transmission lines since their inception. They've proven time and time again that they can bring those projects in on time, under budget, and have just simply been exceptional when it comes to building transmission.
The American Transmission Company is a well-run organization, financially strong.
Our ownership in ATC has produced financial results that allow us to keep our transmission costs down, plus also give us a great rate of return on our investment.
It allows ATC to go out and borrow and establish the appropriate capital structure in order to continue to evolve the transmission system for the benefit of all of us.
They bring that expertise that just takes our reliability up that next notch.
You go back to the 1990s and reliability truly was an issue. Keeping the lights on was a challenge to some extent on those hot summer days, and today it's not even a question.
The reliability for our system has increased tremendously.
And it's particularly important as a growing small utility that we know that we've got the backbone behind us.
They're always watching the system, making sure it's reliable, they're maintaining the system, looking at current needs, looking at the future needs of our members and our members' customers.
Comes to the compliance side of the transmission, it's all taken care of by the American Transmission Company.
They help us understand why we need to do things. They help us to put things into place so that we can comply also.
It's one more resource for our members to better understand the compliance measures that are out there for them.
We can sleep at night knowing that ATC is taking care of the vast majority of the NERC and cybersecurity regulatory issues that if we were a direct owner and had to operate that transmission system, we would be responsible for.
American Transmission Company has consistently provided us with great service.
Customer service is second to none with ATC.
Extremely professional, extremely responsive to our needs, to our community's needs, and to our customers' needs.
We get great service from the American Transmission Company when we need them, each and every time.
I'm very impressed by ATC's public outreach.
Anytime you're going to put a transmission line through any community, there's concerns. And ATC, their way of handling that is information.
Engaging the stakeholders from the get-go and then following through on their commitments.
And make sure that they understand what's involved in the project and how it might impact them individually. That's outstanding.
That openness and honesty pays tremendous dividends, and frankly, it's just the right thing to do.
They've spent a lot of time and effort putting together the environmental impacts that any transmission project might have. and weighing that against the needs of the community.
ATC has a strong commitment to the environmental side of the business.
They just built a new transmission line that came on in Madison, went by the Arboretum, and they actually changed the construction of that line to make sure that the sight lines from the Arboretum were minimized. And I don't know how many transmission companies would take the time to re-engineer a system to address those kind of concerns.
They really take environmental aspects very seriously, and I believe their philosophy truly meshes with County Utility.
The communication from ATC has always been excellent.
We really do feel that we have a voice in things and a seat at the table.
It's been a fantastic partnership.
Our relationship with ATC has been a great one.
So I think before we cover next steps, I think now would be a good time to take some questions.
Anybody, including anybody in the audience, if staff or anybody has questions, please.
And probably best if I could have you guys all come up here. That way everyone can hear.
Go ahead.
So we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere here. What does New Ulm bring to ATC? You've listed the benefits coming our way. What are you guys getting out of it?
We can grow. It's an opportunity for us to grow, for us to learn about how you're doing business out here. I mentioned before that the development of new transmission lines is becoming increasingly competitive, and so if we have partners that can help us expand in new parts of the country, whether it's adjacent to our existing footprint or far distant, that is an opportunity for us to grow and for us to get more value out of the company we've already built. So if we can add another utility at a lower cost, then that utility can grow by itself, and then that's a mutually beneficial partnership. We spent a lot of time improving and fixing the Wisconsin network, and that's going to reach a point where we've sort of achieved success and we're making ongoing investment. But the opportunity to have that growth trajectory where we're taking a system that might not be where it wants to be and getting it to that level of reliability and service that community desires, that is a growth opportunity for ATC as a corporation.
I think you alluded to it earlier, but Minnesota is seen for you folks as far as the surrounding states, your best potential for growth?
I know Michelle said that there's a certain comfort for us to grow in places where we've already done business and where we already do have utility status. But we do look at states that are non-contiguous as well.
Okay. Questions from anybody?
Well, the one question I have is, and it still goes back to, you were talking about fines and from compliance and stuff. If something happens with your person in Michigan, gets a fine for whatever, does that affect us? Do we got to pay part of that too, being a member? Or does that just stay up with them, or what happens?
Go ahead, Kid.
ATC would be responsible for that fine. It does not get rolled into our rates, so we cannot recover it. So it
doesn't come back to us at all, anything. So if something happens up there or down in Illinois, something happens, that don't affect us at all.
ATC's system as a whole would be responsible for the fine, and that could affect, say, the return of cash to all the members. So that one of the things that we take very seriously is that we always take the best practices to stay far away from those fines.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and so those fines are lumpy fines. I mean,
You bet.
They don't really graduate whether you're a small utility or a large utility. And so, while to your point, the number of parties that might be exposed to risk is larger in a partnership, the size of that risk to any one party is smaller when the pool's bigger. So if City of New Ulm were to be a transmission owner and incur one of those penalties, those would fall directly on New Ulm. As a member of ATC, in the unlikely event that we were to receive a penalty, those penalties would be spread across the entire network.
Okay, so then if something happens in Michigan, we got to pay part of it too then, basically. Okay.
A very small part of it, yes.
Now, I think, the other thing I would add is NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Council, and then they have regional councils. The MRO, Midwest Reliability Organization, would be the one that's relevant to Western Wisconsin and Minnesota. MRO has invited us in to lead the seminars because they value the processes that we've put in place, because we take it's deadly serious for us to make sure that we understand how those rules are structured and how that compliance works. So, you know, we put that on the top of our list of best practices.
A lot of times what's good today, in 10 years down the road, ain't gonna be good. And all of
Exactly.
a sudden, we're looking at it again and go, hey, 10 years ago, we were here.
Yep.
Now we gotta pay a fine for what we did 10 years ago. Sometimes that happens.
Okay. And I think, you know, that's the other reason that, you know, it's important to be part of an organization that has a seat at the table, that's helping write those rules, and that's where that depth of understanding can come from.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I had a question. I don't know if I should
Go ahead, yes.
go to the podium.
All right, William Swanson, Energy Services Representative. I just had a question about if upgrades were required in order to become compliant for joining the ATC. How are those costs handled? Are they considered a utilities responsibility? Are they incorporated into the ATC's expenses?
Thanks for the question. So historically, what we have done, we can do one of two things. We can identify those projects and make those improvements after you become a member, and in that situation, the capital cost of those projects would be ATC project costs, and then you would only have to participate in your share of the capital call associated with that project, and that would be on a voluntary basis. So your obligation would be anywhere from your ATC share of that project to zero. The other approach we have taken is allowed you to make those improvements prior to joining ATC, and then the value of those improvements is capitalized as part of the value of the assets that you contributed to ATC, which then expands the size of your ownership share in ATC. Obviously, if there are any outright violations of any reliability standards, we would have to get a waiver from that regulatory authority to absorb assets that were not in compliance. So in rare cases, we've had to take a special approach that addresses that liability. But directly to your question, what is your obligation to make those capital expenditures? We can do it one of two ways. You can do it prior to, and that changes your investment in ATC, or we can put it on the long-term plan and capitalize those improvements as ATC.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Anyone else, thoughts? Back to you guys.
So to wrap up, wanted to lay out what we see as some next steps here in continuing our relationship with New Ulm. And one of the first things that we put on the list was to be able to hear some more perspectives from our members. If there's certain utilities that I know Jim's got experience at some utilities that are ATC members. If there's certain utilities that you'd like to interface with and be able to ask questions to on a peer-to-peer level, we can work to organize that and build your comfort in a contribution to ATC. Then we'd look to achieve some type of exclusivity between ATC and New Ulm that would work towards an integration, a MISO integration, with a set time frame. So if you decide that the path that's best for New Ulm is to seek MISO membership and that path is with ATC, then we'd look to achieve some exclusivity to that. We can put some more meat on our financial analysis for you. We can put some more direction upon additional projects that you might seek either before you join ATC in order to increase your equity share, or subsequent to joining ATC. We can take a look from a planning standpoint to give you more information to be able to do that. It's just in your best interest and our best interest that's exclusive to working with ATC. So then, from there, we'd outline, as part of that process, I guess, we would outline requirements for New Ulm to be a contributing member and, look at things like what risks we're willing to assume as part of that, identification of, hedging strategies in the sense of what do the financials really look like for you? What can you really anticipate, over the next 10 years to see from your ATC contribution? Just give you more information for that. And then let you know, like Eric said, what are the minimum requirements for the system? Are we looking at a system that needs additional work in order to be compliant? Doesn't sound like it, but we never know until we get in there. And so, there's a lot of work on ATC's end to make sure that we have enough information so that we can make sure there's no surprises for you as well. So we would take a look high level at all these things as part of exclusive agreement together. And then we'd seek to create a roadmap for integration and a timeline to achieve that so that we're not surprising you with what the expectations are, and vice versa, that we're not surprising you as well. So we know that you have a decision in front of you that can lead you several different ways. We wanted to give you some of our thoughts on what those 3 ways look like and the considerations that you should consider as part of that. And we're here to answer any questions that you have either now or down the road. And we'd love to set up something for you too to keep talking with our members.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Anybody got any final thoughts? If not,
If we get into this thing, Dan,
What's that?
if we get into this,
Yes.
how do we get out?
That's a good question for the attorney sitting to your right.
Yeah.
The contract looks like, I suppose.
It would
what
depend on the
happens-
contract, yeah.
Yeah, what happens 5 years down the road, we decide that this ain't working?
It's something we're gonna have to discuss if we're
Yeah.
looking at proceeding further on this. You're
Right.
absolutely right.
Ever had anybody want to get out?
No. And actually, at this point, we can say, and it could be from a variety of circumstances, but all the projects that we have put out, we have never had a member decide that it wasn't in their best interest to contribute to that capital call. So, for us, that means right now that we're doing our homework, we're getting the message out early and often, and we're communicating the benefits well to our members. And as long as we can keep doing that, we hope that that's the outcome that continues.
Jim, would this be lines and substations? Or maybe?
With the ATC model, it's shared substations, so, the breakers and the controls for the breakers that would be a line terminal, a transmission line terminal would be part of the contribution. Other stuff in the substation, the breakers that would protect the high side of our distribution transformers or our generator step-up transformers, we'd still own.
How do you think we stack up
As far,
quality of equipment wise for meeting the standard?
I don't think we'd have any problem. Our problem is our system has been designed as a network system. We've got big investments in there for breakers and relaying that, do nothing as it's operated radially right now. So what we'd really be doing is realizing the investment that we've had in there for probably 20 years, realizing the advantages of a network system. And there's other advantages too, because when you look at who owns what, in a joint substation, you define what's transmission, what's distribution, and there's a lot of stuff that's common. And the person who's gonna end up owning the common is the person who has a greater share of either transmission and distribution or generation. And in our case, we don't own all the common because we've got the substation transformers, which are the biggest capital items in a substation. But then, correct me if I'm wrong, but we get some payment for their use of our common facilities.
Correct. When we went through the formation process, and it's exactly as Jim articulated, we wanted to make sure there was a clear owner for each asset. But when you looked at the fence, the building, the gravel, and the ground grid, it benefits both the transmission assets and the generation assets. And our accountants would work with your accountants to do a proration, and we would pay, you would likely, I think Jim's probably right, New Ulm would likely be the owner of those common assets, and ATC would contribute to plowing the snow, cutting the grass, and doing the things that have to happen on those common assets. And New Ulm would be the reliable custodian to make sure that all that happened.
And the big key for us is, 69 kV breakers. It's nothing we're geared up to maintain. We've got a handful. We'd probably be transferring, no more than 6. And for any of that work, we contract it all out right now. Our people would still be involved with any work in our substations, but it would just be somebody else writing the contract for that maintenance work.
How about existing agreements that we have with Heartland and others too? Is there any known conflicts?
I can't think of any, but, we would let, Heartland know what we're doing, as we'd continue to talk with any potential partner. Let them make that decision if there's any issues for them there, but I don't see any.
This was kind of a off of your comment, but, and I'm sure you'll be able to answer it. So this isn't directed to you as an employee of ATC, but ATC in general. If the city of New Ulm is going to be recognizing a 12.2% return on equity, how do you guys get your money? Where does that come from? I mean, you're paying us for, common, facility. Where does your revenue come from? See, I should have pointed to you.
This is the guy. You don't want to hear it from me.
What it is ATC would be paying for those expenses or other things. It goes into ATC's tariff across all of ATC's zones, so that the cost specific, for those individual substations, et cetera, that gets rolled into the ATC tariff and then recovered through our tariff mechanism on those expenses, et cetera. On your investment that you're contributing, you're the ones earning the money on it. Now, what you're actually earning is your proportionate share of the earnings that go across the entire system, because you would have that value of equity of the total equity. It's a much, much bigger pie, obviously. You've got a smaller piece of it, but it works out to the same amount as what you contributed. So it's not that the existing owners are, they're not growing their investment because they didn't invest anything when you came along. You came in, you contributed, you're earning based on the contribution. Going forward, as more investment opportunities occur, you have the opportunity to invest further.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, ATC owns transmission and it's receiving its own 12.2%. No?
Correct. Yeah, all of the members contributed their system. When we were founded, there was about $500 million worth of rate base. And the ATC members each owned a proportionate share of the system. Then the system, as we've been building and improving it, it's now up over that $3 billion mark. It's owned by the members. The member owners own the system. You would be a member owner owning the system proportionate to what investment you've made. You start out with your investment of your contribution. So in the example, if your assets are $700,000, you've just made $350,000 worth of investment.
But I think to Brian's point, we'll be paying you to use those transmission lines to bring the electricity from outside through your transmission line or the co-op's transmission lines to New Ulm.
Well, my understanding right now, you pay a transmission rate to NSP for bringing power in.
Yes.
And you would be a member of MISO and you would be in the rate zone, in the GRE rate zone, which is actually the one I believe that you're located in. And so it would be a composite rate, which is basically the rate that what you're paying now to them, except for your assets that currently weren't included in that rate would now be included in making up of all of the rates in MISO. And so what you're paying in transmission charges really wouldn't change, except for your assets, which right now you've been paying for just as
Right.
your utility, would now be included in the pot that gets shared with everybody else.
Right, but on the, I guess,
Yeah.
on the other side then, as electric utilities are paying for transmission of electricity across the state, you guys get a share of that?
Yes.
Based on how much of the lines are yours or something like that?
Correct. We would calculate a revenue requirement for that. For example purposes, let's say 3,700,000, because we added the 3 billion in your
Right.
contribution. We'd have a new rate base. We'd come up with a new revenue requirement, and that would be allocated across all of our zones, including the Minnesota zone here,
Right.
and go into the rates that way. It'd be recovered, and then the earnings from that would be allocated
Okay.
across all of our member owners, including New Ulm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bill,
and
another way to look at it.
I think I understand the formula,
Okay.
okay? But my guess, my point is, you're charging 15%, no?
No,
So, then my answer is, where do you get your money from to operate?
you are us.
You are.
We would work for you. You're the owner.
But I don't sign your paycheck. Okay, so you're getting a paycheck from somebody.
Yeah.
And the revenue to fill that bank account is coming from somebody, and I'm asking, where does that money come from?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is, where does our salary come from? And there's a member called ATC Management, Inc., which is where all the employees at ATC work and where our salaries are funded. And we are part of the operations and maintenance expense, but we are not part of the capital that actually earns the return on equity. So we are a pass-through. We recover our necessary O&M, including salaries, for ATC Management, Inc. But ATC Management, Inc. is what, one?
It's very, very small. I mean,
It's
for an owner.
1/100%, or it has to be a member owner, but it's tiny, just to meet the needs of the LLC structure. So we are not skimming off the capital. We're managing the operations and maintenance of the system, and the professional employees are part of that
And
management process.
Management Inc. is actually owned by the members. So ultimately, we really do just work for the members.
Yeah, Brian, another way.
I understand that too. You still haven't answered the question where Management Inc. gets its revenue to pay the operations. Because if, in a simple, if you can charge 12.2% for the use of all the transmission, and you're giving 12.2 to all the members that have contributed the equity to this, we're not paying a membership fee to you to be a member. We're not
Right.
paying you
So-
$1,000 a month to be a member so that
No,
you
you're-
can pay the organization
Right.
wages.
You're paying rates.
Asking, where does that money come from? If the 12.2 is just a pass-through, we
Right.
pay it and we
So-
get this back, where do you get your operational funds from?
So when you
Simple question.
Absolutely. So when you buy transmission service through a FERC tariff, which is that's the contract we have with our customers. It's a FERC tariff, and it has really three elements. It has the O&M cost of that asset, right? The real operating cost of that asset, the day-to-day cost of keeping that line hung, is a pass-through as part of the tariff. There is a recovery on the debt. So the actual cost of borrowing money is part of the rate. That is a direct pass-through. And then there is a return on equity, which is in many respects like the return on debt. And so basically, the FERC recognizes that in order to have a healthy company, you have to have a mix of equity and debt. And so it approves as part of the tariff a return to the debt to the equity investor. And that 12.2 or 12.5%, that is the FERC regulated return to the equity holder. And so when we cut a check to the member, what we are doing is saying the FERC has authorized that if you're a transmission owner with this tariff, equity owners get 12.2%. Everything else is an operating cost that is also a separate component of the tariff. So the operating cost is a pass-through, and we are part of that operating cost. The cost to cover the debt is a pass-through at the real cost of debt, and then the return on equity is right as part of the bill. It goes right to the equity investor, and as you are an equity investor, that is where your money comes from. So we come out in the operating cost for the assets. The return on equity is a return to the equity holder, and all of our equity holders are utility members. There are no equity holders that didn't contribute assets or cash to ATC.
Would it be fair to say your salaries come out of the tariff?
Absolutely.
They're part of the operating expenses.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Jim?
One thing to look at is, we always talk about trying to build a hedge against rising transmission costs. And the bill always comes from MISO, and we're never going to completely hedge that MISO bill. We went back and looked at how one of their members had done. We looked at Manitowoc's, and since 2001, the return they got from contributing their assets to ATC were like $8 million, but they paid out $39 million to MISO. So they hedged just a portion of that. So it's nothing like our transmission costs are going away. It's just if Manitowoc hadn't joined in 2001, they would have still had that $39 million MISO bill and no outside revenue coming in to offset that as a hedge.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do is build a similar hedge, and that's why we'd want to work closer to define what those financial returns would be. Through the whole thing, what we pay MISO doesn't change. Just what we get back to hedge that cost is what we have control over.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just a question. How do you guys calculate our contribution, our assets?
So the calculation of the asset contribution is on the net book value, so the depreciated book value of the assets. And the reason that we've taken that approach is that from the ratepayer standpoint, if we were to bring those assets over at anything higher than the net book value, the regulator views that as double counting, basically. If a ratepayer has already paid for an asset, you can't charge that ratepayer or another ratepayer again for the value of that same asset. At a high level, that is the basis for asset transfer. And it's from asset valuation and depreciation, I'm simplifying it, but at a high level, that's how we look at it.
And the idea with that is you're going to earn based upon what you're bringing to the table of earning assets. And if we were to give you a greater ownership share, it's coming off of the people who have already invested with us. And similarly, if we talk to somebody else who wants to join, you don't want us to cut your earnings on your investment to bring them in. So the idea is that we're consistent across all the members and treat all the members the same. So you bring in your investment and you're earning on your investment.
There was one slight exception to that in our formation that I will point out, and we mentioned before that WPPI, which is a group of public power utilities in Wisconsin, is an owner member of ATC, and actually Mike Peters sits on our board. At our formation, it was viewed as very important that the municipal utilities not feel like this was an IOU venture where they were getting squeezed out or marginalized in the discussion. And so we recognized that relative to the transmission assets that the IOUs owned, the municipal utilities didn't have a lot of chips to bring to the table. And so we didn't limit their participation on day one to their asset value. We actually allowed them to buy into ATC, and that's why WPPI has such a high percentage ownership of ATC, and it's one of the reasons why they were given a board seat early on. And that was really a matter of making sure that our stakeholders were uniformly involved and engaged in our decision-making process. So that was one exception to that process. But in that case, the cash was value, so it wasn't, it came over at cash value as opposed to asset value.
Right. They brought cash rather than physical assets. But still, they're earning on the investment. I mean, we took the cash, coupled it with debt, and invested in hard assets that way.
Do you guys have a credit rating?
Yes. Yeah, we're plus, I mean, yeah.
Triple A, A plus, I think.
So in the various, between Moody's and Standard & Poor's, we have a AAA and an A+ right now are two credit ratings.
Okay.
And if you think about it, I mean, we send out 26 bills. We don't send out 26 million bills. The folks that pay our bills are investor-owned, municipals, and cooperatives, and their customers are very good at paying their bills to them. So that cash flow chain is, under the FERC tariff, it's very well documented, and the reliability of the flow of payments is very, very consistent.
Other questions?
Just one more question. You mentioned board membership was based on a percentage of the assets they bought or what they bought into. Is that the only way that you become a board member? Based on the value of your assets?
Well, board members are elected
Okay.
to the board, and the way that our board is set up, it's not voted on a percent ownership. Once the board members all have equal vote. Sorry. And so the board members are then elected by the membership and in that fashion. So it's not an automatic membership grant or not automatic board seat grant usually.
How many board members do you have?
We have 11 approved, 10 currently.
We have one empty seat that we haven't filled. And the board members consist of 5 members, 4 independents, and our CEO is also a board member as the chairman of the board. So.
Okay. Anything else? If not, I would imagine staff will be bringing us a report that will make it very easy for us to make a decision one way or the other.
With the city attorney's help.
So we'll be looking forward to seeing that. Thank you again
Thank you.
for your
Thank
time.
you for your
Thank you,
time.
everybody. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.